to follow along, you can turn to Mark chapter 8. Mark chapter 8 is where we're going to be in just a moment. Mark chapter 8. We're talking about some of the questions that Jesus asked while he was on this earth and how his death, burial, and resurrection were the ultimate answer to a lot of those questions. And this memorial is our reminder to the answer Jesus gave to the very questions that he asked. And these questions were not asked in a vacuum. These questions were asked in the context of his life. And so when he asked these questions, people knew what he had taught, but they also knew how he had lived. And the answers were really made clear by how Jesus lived. So in Mark chapter 8, Jesus is going to ask two very important questions. He actually asked several questions before our text. One of the questions he's asked in Mark chapter 8 already is, who do men say that I am? And then he says, who do you say that I am? And so in a real sense, when we come together to remember the Lord's Supper, we're answering that question. We're answering the question that Jesus asked his disciples, who do you say that I am? We're answering that question this morning. We're saying, Jesus, we believe you are the Christ, the Son of God. That's why we are here. So I want to read Mark chapter 8, starting in verse 34. Mark chapter 8, starting in verse 34. It says this: When he had called the people to himself, with his disciples also, he said to them, whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him the Son of Man also will be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with his holy angels. First, let's note this. Jesus calls the people to himself, and it specifically mentions in this text that he calls his disciples to himself also. So imagine this for a second. Let's say Jesus had sent out an invitation to all of us directly. He texted everyone, called everyone, whatever, and says, all right, I want you guys to gather with me at 620 Palm Springs Drive at 9 o'clock in the morning on Sunday. Now, we would know that Jesus is going to share with us some pretty special information. You don't call people to yourself to have a conversation with them in this type of a formal way without having something important to say. So Jesus wasn't going to share with them what he had for lunch. He wasn't going to share some trivial information. So I can see them as they gather closer to Jesus, really sort of leaning in towards Jesus, wanting to make sure they hear exactly what he has to say because they know what is going to come out of his mouth must be important because he called a special meeting for this. He at least said, everybody come over here and listen to what I have to say. His instructions were very important here. And it lays the foundation for the question. And it really, his instructions are what makes the question a no-brainer. It's easy to answer the question once he gives his instructions. So let's look at what his instructions were. He says, first, if anyone wants to come after me, the first thing they must do is to deny themselves. So Jesus is looking around at the multitude, maybe especially at his disciples, and he says, if you want to follow me, the first thing that you have to do is you must deny yourself. Does that mean that we have to deny ourselves things? Yeah, we're going to have to deny ourselves some things. Does that mean we're going to have to deny ourselves some pleasures? Yes, we're going to have to deny ourselves some pleasures. Does that mean we're going to have to deny ourselves our time? When we want to spend our time for ourselves, are we going to have to deny that time that we have and spend it on other people? Yes. But it's way deeper than that is what Jesus is saying here. He's saying, if you want to come follow after me, you have to deny yourself. And what that means is you have to come to the realization that you don't have control over your own life. That's hard. And so what follows after that is, if I don't have control over my own life, and I'm giving control over my whole life to God, then all these other things that we just mentioned, the time, the money, the resources, all those things will fall under that umbrella. So it's a much bigger idea that Jesus is getting to his disciples. You must deny yourself control of your life. And like I said, this teaching wasn't done in a vacuum. This teaching was done with the foundation of his life. Who better to illustrate what it looks like to deny yourself than Jesus Christ? They could look at him and say, boy, yeah, I know what that looks like, because I know what it looks like to follow after you. I know what it looks like to look at Jesus. There's a song that I know I've read these lyrics to you before. It's a song, it means so much to me. I love this song. It's called He Still Came. So I'm going to read it to you again. It says, no palace, no jewels, no kingdom to rule, no crown of majesty, no throne and no robe, no silver, no gold, no courts of royalty. Yet the King of Kings left heaven to become a lowly man. He left all heaven's glory to fulfill his Father's plan. Jesus denied himself. Verse 2, no family, no friends to help at the end, no out, no substitute. That in and of itself is amazing. You know, we always can come up with someone to substitute for us. You know, if you're going to miss a worship service and you have the call of worship and you can't make it, no offense, Matt, but they could find somebody to substitute for you, right? We can find a substitute for Matt. Even as a preacher, you could find a substitute. If I called in and said, I can't make it, well, you can find someone else to do this. Jesus was facing the most critical point of his life. There was no one behind him, no one around him, no one that he could say, would you do this for me? He was the only one who could do it. Much pain and much hurt to give love and worth. He bore our sins and grief, yet the hope of what he offered so outweighed what must be done. He chose to be my victor and assured my pardon won. And the chorus says, he still came just for me. He still came. Knowing all he would endure, he still came. Disregarding every cost from the manger to the cross, he still came just for me. He still came. Jesus denied himself over and over. Just leaving heaven was a denial of himself. Coming says, I don't have control. And as a matter of fact, in John chapter 6, in verse 38, he says, I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but to do the will of the one who sent me. Jesus was the master at giving up control of his own life. In the garden, what did Jesus say? Not my will be done, but your will be done. So Jesus says, if you want to follow after me, the first thing that you have to do is to deny yourself. And his entire life was an example of what that looked like. Then he says you got to take up your cross. And this is before he took up his cross, literally to go die for them. So he says you're going to have to take up your cross in order to do this. Now remember, some of these who were here at this particular occasion were his disciples, and they would have to take up their cross. They would literally have to take up their cross and die. As a matter of fact, when Jesus is restoring Peter at the end, he tells Peter how he's going to die. And that's when Peter turns around and says, what about John? And Jesus says, don't worry about him. You just worry about yourself. So he tells them, you're going to have to take up your cross one day. He was calling them to give up their life if necessary. But more importantly, he was calling them to give up their life in the way they lived. Sometimes somebody will ask a question, especially of us men, would you give up your life for your wife or your children? And the answer is always yes. But the ultimate way of giving up your life is not in death. The ultimate way of giving up your life is through living. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15, I die daily. So Jesus says, you want to come after me, you must deny yourself, take up your cross, and he says you got to follow after me. Jesus is the ultimate example of what it looks like to persevere all the way to the end. Because he did take up his cross all the way to the very end, and they nailed him to the cross. John chapter 10, verse 17 says, therefore my Father loves me because I lay down my life that I may take it again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down myself. I have power to lay it down, the power to take it again. This command I received from my Father. And what I want you to know, Jesus gave his life. It wasn't forcefully taken from him. He allowed his hands to be tied behind his back and led off to the cross. He allowed himself to be nailed to that cross. And then verse 35 tells us the only way to really have anything is to give it all to God. Because if you want to hold on to your life, what's that mean? If you hold on to it, no, I want control of my own life. You're not going to have it. The very thing that you think you want, I'm going to take control of my own life. You're not going to have it. You're going to be taken away from you. But here are his questions. His first question is this. I could just picture yourself in a quiet place. Jesus has called you. He's already said what we've talked about. And then he asks you this question. Maybe he looks you right in the eyes. And he says, for what profit will it be for a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? If you recall, the devil took Jesus up to an exceedingly high place, and he showed him all the kingdoms of the world. He says, you bow down and worship me, all these will be yours. Jesus knew that our souls were more valuable than everything in the entire world. And he knows that that was true for him. He knows that is true for us as well. We have sayings like this. He has the whole world at his feet, or the world is his oyster. These sayings make us feel good that we are in control and we can do what we want, when we want, and go wherever we want. And we have all these opportunities that lie before us, but that's not what the answer is. Jesus says, what would it profit you if you gain the whole world? Let's say you became the richest person in the world tomorrow. How long would that money last you? What's the longest that money could last you? Till you die. That's it. So you want to give up eternity for 20 years of living in luxury? Or 30 years of living and having a huge house, being able to order Grubhub and have the best food in Orlando delivered you every single meal. That sounds pretty good, but it doesn't last very long. There's nothing there. It's temporary. And so Jesus is saying, what would you be willing to give up in exchange for your soul? Today, he's telling us the same thing. He gathers us here today. He says, look at my life. Let's say you gained fame, fortune, popularity. Everybody knew your name. When you walked down the streets, they were in awe of you. But you go to hell. What's it worth? It is not worth it at all. We talk about sacrifices that people make to assure our freedoms from a military standpoint, our physical freedoms, and we should honor and respect the people who have laid down their life to make sure that we live in freedom. How much more should we really respect and honor the Lord who gave his life for us so that we could have spiritual freedom, which is way more important? Jesus could ask this question. Would you be willing to give yourself into bondage in a prisoner of war camp or have freedom on this earth in exchange for your soul? Which would you pick? If you had one or the other, what would you pick? These are tough choices. Jesus isn't telling them small things here. He's telling them big things. And then in verse 37, he says this, or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? If the whole world isn't enough, Jesus says you can gain the whole world and lose your own soul. What profit is that? What will you give in exchange for your soul? And I think that's where it comes down to all of us examining our own lives on a regular basis. Is there something in my life that I am insistent that I have control over and I haven't given to God, and that I think is the most important thing and I'm not going to let go of? And that's hard, isn't it? It's hard to examine our time, our energy, our effort, our money, our resources, whatever that is. We want to have control over those things. The rich young ruler, you remember him? It's easy to keep commandments. It's hard to give up control. So Jesus is hitting us at the very deepest level of who we are. Are you really want to follow after me? You must give up control. Jesus picked you over staying in heaven. Just let that sink in for a second. He said, I love Joe more than I love being in heaven right now. He picked you over all the earthly possessions in the entire world. He picked you over earthly fame. He picked you over comfort. He picked you over power on this earth. He picked you over having influence on this earth. He picked you over his own family. He picked you over his own life. His death, burial, and resurrection answered the question of our worth to him. What will I give in exchange for your soul? Everything. This memorial reminds us and motivates us to answer back to Jesus. What will I give in exchange for your love? I give my life back to you. Let's think about how much Jesus gave for our life as we continue to remember him.